Welcome, everyone, to Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Derling. I have a returning guest here, always someone I like talking to from the Books on Rock podcast, Mr. Eric Senich. How you doing, Eric?
Yes. Tim, how are you, man? Happy holidays.
Yes,
How's it
you too.
going?
Happy New Year. We're
Yep.
2025, man. It's
Yep.
crazy. So, the reason I've got Eric on here, and I can think of no one better to do this with, we're going to talk about some of the best music books, like our top 10 music books that have come out in the last year, because there's a lot of them coming out all the time. So I thought maybe I'd pick Eric's brain to see what he thought were kind of the creme de la creme. So we're going to do 3, 3, and 4. And if we have any repeats, we'll just talk, or if we have any that are the same, I guess we'll talk about them together. Mine aren't really in any particular order, but I'm going to let Eric start. So, Eric, three great music books came out within the last year.
Yeah. So I'll start with three. This is not easy, Tim, because doing this podcast, I probably like over a year. How many? If I do one, sometimes two per week, how many books is that I cover
Yeah.
this year?
Yeah. And I do want to mention this is not a slight to anybody that's not on the list.
Yep.
Absolutely. This is just so it's not a 4 hour long episode.
Oh, yeah, because there are some absolutely outstanding books that are probably not going to make this list because we got to pare it down to 10. So, yeah. I want to start with, I guess I'll start with probably going back maybe chronologically. If I look back at the early goings, there was an absolutely fantastic book on, do you know the band Moby Grape?
I've heard of them, and when I've heard of them, it's usually Robert Plant talking about them.
Yes, Robert Plant is a big fan of Moby Grape. Moby Grape was big in the big San Francisco late 60s band that was really kind of like a super group. And Skip Spence was a guy who was in that band who, the best way I could describe him would be a Sid Barrett type. Mental illness, brilliant guy, wrote amazing songs. His story was written. Cam Cobb is the author of this book. It's called Weighted Down: The Complicated Life of Skip Spence. Okay, that's the name of the book. Now, I had Cam on, I think, back in, it's probably maybe March or April of 2024. And this is a guy, his story is, it's almost hard to believe. He, after a few Moby Grape albums, things kind of fell apart, and his mental health starts to fall apart. And long story short is basically there was one night when he's in New York, and he's taking acid or LSD, and he's tripping out, and he grabs one of those little tiny axes that you get in the hotel. You smash the window and you that little axe. He's trying to axe down the door, and he's trying to kill one of his bandmates. I mean, he literally just loses his mind. And so he ends up being institutionalized for a bit. And then the story is that he literally just walked out of there in his pajamas, got a taxi cab back home, and then just went on with his life. Now, he didn't die young. He lived a pretty long time, but he became homeless. But a lot of people over the years became huge fans, like Tom Waits and Beck and Robert Plant. I highly recommend this book. It's a pretty deep story. You got to kind of be in the right mindset, but quite an amazing book. So that would be my first pick. That's Weighted Down: The Complicated Life of Skip Spence.
And I'm just looking here. Skip Spence is actually born in Windsor, Ontario. So he was.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was Canadian. He was based in San Francisco, but yeah, he's Canadian by nature. Yeah, he died in 1999 at the age of 52. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Substance abuse, a lot of, like I said, mental health issues, and died at the age of 52. So that would be my first.
Okay.
That's my first. So a couple more thrown out there. How about another band that deserves, like Moby Grape, but this band's a little more well known, but they should be even more. MC5. You're a fan of the MC5 from Detroit?
I'm not familiar. I know. Kick Out the Jams.
Yeah.
They were a Detroit band, and Alice Cooper talks about them a lot. Yeah.
Kick Out the Jam. Brad Talinsky and Jan Uhelski wrote a book called MC5, an oral biography of rock's most revolutionary band. Very controversial. They had in the late 60s. Talk about a band coming out of Detroit during the hippie era, and they're playing basically heavy metal.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of great songs that they recorded that people just don't know about. But that most famous one is "Kick Out the Jams." But they had their manager was very controversial. He was um, John Sinclair. He actually got into some legal trouble, and John Lennon supported him. And they had a concert in support of John Sinclair back in, I think, in the early '70s. But this book is a fascinating read. It's because it gets into some of the stories that nobody's ever heard because um, maybe the guys weren't comfortable talking about it at the time, but years later they felt more comfortable about really getting into the nitty gritty of this band and the things that went down. And they changed labels and they tried to get back on track, but because they were so controversial that they started to have difficulty getting booked with gigs. But at one point, I believe they were on the cover of Rolling Stone at one point. I think they were really primed for a huge career, but fell short. So that's book number 2. Brad Talinsky, Jan Uhelski, MC5, an oral biography of rock's most revolutionary band. Let's see, a third one. I'm going to go with Daniel Bucksman's Rush at 50.
I got to get that.
Yep.
I'm remiss on that, but I haven't got around to it yet.
Fantastic book, beautifully laid out, a lot of great photos, a lot of great information on the band. Even if it's stuff that you already know as a hardcore Rush fan, it's just a beautiful book. So I'll go with Rush at 50. I had Daniel on my show to talk about that book. Hey, what's there to say about Rush that hasn't already been said, man? This is a band that deserves a book like that to celebrate 50 years. And you wish there would be more years coming, but as we know, that once Neil Peart was gone, that was it.
Yeah.
But a great look back on 50 years of an absolutely phenomenal, legendary band. So those are 3 I'm throwing out there to start.
Very cool. Well, my first one is actually the only one on my list that isn't about a group in particular, but the funny story behind this one. I was aware of this book before it was released, and it's because I put my books out through Amazon, and my very first book was called Unspooled, an adventure in 8-track. So whenever I would go on and look, basically there's a lot of things you have to do to get your books through Amazon, but it's worked out for me. It's worked out. But every time I would type in Unspooled, inevitably I would see this come up. And this book is called Unspooled: How the Cassette Made Music Shareable. So I'll just hold that up.
Okay.
Yeah, it's written by Rob Drew, and Rob is professor of communication at Saginaw Valley State University. He also wrote a book called Karaoke Nights and Ethnographic Rhapsody. And so this book came out after my Unspooled book, but I reached out to Rob, and I basically said, hey, we each have a book called Unspooled, and it's different subtitles, but would you like to come on and talk about it? And also I found that the subject very, very interesting because it was kind of a revolution, because for the first time, I mean, it was Napster before Napster was a thing, right? You could record songs off the radio, you could duplicate records, and the music industry was in an uproar over it. I don't know if you remember in the early 80s, there was that whole home taping is killing music, is killing the music industry.
Sure.
And so there were pros and cons to it. Now, this deals a lot with indie bands and demo tapes and putting up your music there. So it's not really in my musical wheelhouse, but I was so fascinated by the subject matter because, I mean, I started out with cassettes, and I think a lot of people my age did. Not just recording songs off the radio, but when I first started buying albums, I wasn't buying records. Nobody was buying records at that point. CDs hadn't quite come along. I started buying cassettes. They were small. You could get your Walkman. So, yeah. But Rob was super nice, and he was super gracious. I sent him a copy of my Unspooled book, and so yeah, that's my first one. Rob Drew, cool. Unspooled. So
does he lay it out like you do on your book? Is it similar?
Oh my goodness, this is so deep. Like this, you could tell he's a college professor, because some of it I'm just like, whoa, like it's it's so in depth, right? But it's really, really interesting. And we had a really cool discussion. Actually, most of the books I'm going to talk about, probably like yourself, I've had the authors on to talk about. But yeah, it was just so I was just so tickled by the idea there was another book called Unspooled, and I liked the idea of the whereas I went back to 8 tracks, he went to cassettes, so it was a a no brainer that I would have him on.
Yeah, cassettes were a way of life, man. For you and I, our age, we're
I
around the
bet
same
you I
age.
had over 200 cassettes before I started buying CDs.
Yeah,
So yeah, my musical education occurred with cassettes and reading
and
the liner notes. Now I got to be honest, I can't believe it. I look at some of the old cassettes and I open them up and I say, how did I read these liner notes and
yeah,
lyrics? It's
I
so
know.
small.
But also, you could not leave the house without having that Case Logic with all of your cassettes in it in the
Oh yeah,
vehicle car with you.
I've had ones that I've had the
Yeah,
ones that held 30. I've had a little like Velcro one. You put 6 of your favorites in if you're in
sure.
a
So
hurry.
you'd switch out and say, okay,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
let's put
yeah.
this one in and take
It
that one
was a
out.
must. It was
Yeah,
just how it was.
yeah.
My next two are related, and actually, I'm not going in order. Mine's I'm normally really organized this way, but this is just how I kind of grabbed them. I wanted to talk about Alex Van Halen brothers. Now I was a long time getting this book compared to normal when a book comes out like this. I'd read some passages from it. I'm like, I don't know if I want to read this. This doesn't sound. Uh, but I read it. Now, to be quite honest, there wasn't much in this book that I read that I hadn't heard in some form or another. Alex goes into a lot more detail about a lot of these things, but it's his point of view, and it was interesting. Alex, he was always like the mystery man of Van Halen. The few times he would do interviews, you'd be like, what is he talking about? So, so I found it a more straightforward read than say Dave's Crazy from the Heat.
Oh,
But but if you're a Van
yeah.
Halen fan, I don't understand why he stops in 1984. I really don't. But contrary to what people have said, Sammy Hagar's name is mentioned exactly twice in this book. So it's not a total.
Yeah.
We'll just hold on. Okay, there you
Oh,
are.
there you go.
Yeah. At what
You
point
lost
did
me.
you lose me?
You said Alex's book. You're kind of disappointed that it ends in 1984, but it wasn't a total, and then you froze.
Well, I mean, Sammy's name is in there twice.
Yes, Sammy's name is in there twice.
It's not a
Yeah.
total
Yeah.
block. But
His reason is that those were the most pivotal years. Those are the years where they made that climb. They had a dream. They achieved that dream, and they reached the pinnacle. They reached the. Actually, Alex kind of says they could have even gone farther if Dave hadn't left. But
I mean, that's a what if, right? You always wonder about that.
But point being is that those are the years he felt. Yeah, that's one of mine.
And it was never supposed to be the definitive history of Van Halen,
right?
Either. So he can do what he wants. However, the next one I want to talk about is this is a series that you've already discussed, the At 50. My good friend Martin Popoff,
yes.
Van Halen at 50. I believe you had him on to talk about this.
I did, yeah.
And, so Martin's done a few of these at 50. I've got one other to talk about. And this is really good. And I like how he breaks these up, 50 pivotal events, but I also like how he uses song titles that have to do with what, and I try and adopt that because that's right in my wheelhouse. I always like punning on song titles and album titles and stuff.
He's got a lot of compliments regarding that, by the way. He was telling me a lot of people love the fact that he's titling chapters after songs.
And it doesn't even have to do with the time period. The time period doesn't even have to be right. For example, he talks about when they issued the Live Without a Net concert video. He calls it Dirty Movies. Just because it fits. He's talking about a movie of sorts. I didn't really learn anything from it, but there was a lot of detail in here. A lot of great pictures, and I think just like the Alex book, I still miss Eddie, man. I still wish we had more music to listen to.
You're telling me.
So this kind of it just reminds us of what these books do it their best is they send me back to the catalogs, and there's definitely some other examples of that. So that's my first three. So The Unspooled by Rob Drew, brothers Alex Van Halen and Martin Popoff's Van Halen at 50.
Yeah, and props to Motor Books because they're responsible. They play a big role in the beautiful layout of those books. Those at 50 books. There's another one, Legacy of Bob Marley and the Wailers, a book. I believe was also Motor Books too. Bob Marley and the Wailers, the ultimate illustrated history, but they just do an amazing job. And shout out to my friend Steve Roth, who works for Motor Books, who's also the co-host of the DLR cast, by the way. Big Dave fan. So, all right. So you got your three. It's time for me to move on to my next three, right?
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. I'm going to go with my man, Greg Prado, one of the prolific authors up there with Martin Popoff. And he wrote a book, Rats on Rat. It's called World Infestation, the Rat Story. And oh, you got it. Yeah, cool. Oh, you had him on. Did you have Greg?
Yeah, I had Greg on. Yeah, that was one of my next three. I love Rat. I think I like them more now than I ever did. I wish they'd get over themselves and get back together. But yeah, I just love this band. They never did a bad album, and I just wanted to read about them. And I'm Greg. I first came up on my radar. I didn't have him on because I didn't have my show back then. But when he did the Eric Carr story, I really liked that.
Yes.
That because he talks about a period in Kiss's history that's never talked about. Then he had to take it off, which deals with the similar time period. But yeah, I had Greg on to talk about this.
Take It Off breaks down the 80s.
Yeah.
That he basically goes over what Greg's style is he's got his own unique style. Basically, he lets the people tell the story. You know, he sets up each chapter with what it's going to be about, but then from there, it is interviews with the people who were there, the members of the band, producers, etc. And you get a great idea of what it was like from the days on the Sunset Strip as they make their rise and ultimately become one of the biggest bands by the mid 80s. Yep. And that's a great one. World Infestation, the Rat Story. One I want to throw out there, but it actually technically was late 2023, but we mentioned Eric Carr, and in early 2024, I did have an author of a book, Janet Simmons, who wrote a book really under the radar. Not a lot of people talked about it, and I'm surprised it wasn't talked about more. The Rise of the Fox, 1950 to 1982, The Extraordinary Life of Kiss's second drummer, Eric Carr, revealed. And that is part of I think she's going to do 3 altogether. Definitely another one coming, but it really gets into the contract that he signed with Kiss, his teen years, all that stuff. I just want to give a shout out because that was late 2023, but a very good book.
I don't think I'm aware. I don't think I heard about that.
I believe it was a self-published book.
I'll have to check that out because I'm a big fan. I mean, I'm a big Kiss fan, but I really am. I've always been intrigued by 1980 to 83 because of everything that went on. Creatures of the Night's my favorite Kiss album. I'm one of those weirdos that likes the Elder, so I'm fascinated with that period. Yeah,
check that book out. Episode 172 on Booked on Rock podcast, if you want to listen to that interview, because there's a lot of great stuff in there about how they came up with the fox and how he was going to be at first. He was going to be
like a bird.
The hawk. Yeah, he was going to be the hawk. Yeah. She's got pictures in there. The whole story about really went right down to like the last 24 to 48 hours before his first ever show where they had to make a decision and come up with the costume. So that's a great one. But technically that's 2023. So I got to pick another one, right? Okay. How about, so you had Alex's, you mentioned that one.
Yeah, but if you got more to say about it, go for it.
Yeah. Well, that is one of mine. Yeah. That is one of mine. I mean, I think, the only complaint is why didn't you cover post 1985, the Sammy years? But having said that, this was the most anticipated book of the year for me as a huge fan. Yeah. This is one I really wanted to read. And I have a whole different perspective of not just Alex and Eddie's relationship as brothers, but just Alex, because he's done a great job with these interviews that he's done.
Oh yeah.
He's just shown that he's a really seems like a good dude, down to earth guy, and you feel for him. He's been going through obviously a difficult time, and I think he's handled it very well. And I think he did an amazing job in the book, and the fact, knowing that this isn't something that he's normally uh, something normally that he would do is he doesn't really like the spotlight on him. But I think that just to hear some of some of the stories about their childhood, and explaining a lot of what happened to Eddie emotionally and with the abuse and the alcohol and the drugs, is that you realize this is a very sensitive guy, a very
Yeah.
sensitive artist, brilliant artist, but somebody who was as affected as compliments. He was as affected as much with compliments as he was with criticism. If somebody said he was the best ever, that would make him uncomfortable. If somebody criticized something he did, like Van Halen 3, it hit him hard. Van Halen
Look what
3
it did
hit
to
him
his
hard.
creativity. Look
Yeah.
what it did. Like, he never, basically, you had the 3 songs with Sammy on Best of Both Worlds and Different Kind of Truth, and that was it as
Yeah.
far as officially released stuff. And for that matter, I mean, okay, yeah, he stopped in 1984, but he never even talked about the reunion with Dave. So
Right.
it's not like he omitted Sammy for the and then picked up around the late 90s. He just stopped in 84.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad. I'm just glad that he wrote it. I hope that it gave him some closure. I think it was something that was important for him to do. And
Yeah.
now let's see him get into those vaults, which he said he's going to
Oh,
do. So
yeah.
that's cool,
I can't,
man.
I hope.
Yeah.
I hope it's like Prince, where all of a sudden here's all this new to most people music.
Yeah. Yeah. Now here's one. There's a few bands on my list here that I'm thinking you may not be a fan of, and one I threw out there before we started recording was REM. There's a book on them I want to talk about. But what about U2? Are you a U2 fan?
No,
Not
that's
really.
okay.
Okay. No, that's
I'm
yeah.
asking you what
Just
your
curious. Just
yeah.
curious to see, because there's one of the books that make the list of recommended books from 2024. I would say is one that was written on. Let me find it here. It was written on their album Pop from 1997.
So that's an interesting album to write a
I was about to say, now why write a book on that album, right? But it's one of those. Is it a lemon or is it an overlooked gem in U2's catalog? Like, how do we think about it? How do U2 fans feel about it now? How many years later? 25 years later or whatever? No, 20 years later or so, as opposed to then. And what went into the album? What were they thinking? What were they trying to do? Were they, do they regret the album? Are they still fans of it? So I highly recommend the book, which is called, Jeff Harkness is the author, 40-Foot Lemon, the complete story of U2's Pop and Pop Mart. He also gets into the tour. Is that two? Do I got one more?
Well,
No, I did three.
So Van Halen, Rat, U2.
Yeah, there's three. There we go. There we go. Okay.
So my next two, that they're, well, actually no, my next three, they go together actually. They're all Martin Popoff books, and Martin's
okay.
been such a mentor to me, whether he knows it or not. I think he does, because 4 years ago, no, well, let's say 5 years ago, the idea of being a writer would never have occurred to me. Now I've got 4 books. It was really Martin to kick that off. Now the next 3 books they're books of Martin's, and I'm not picking them because I'm in them, because my stuff is the least interesting of all of these. but these are all,
I would disagree, but
these are all really good, really thorough books. I guess let me see. I'll go in order of when they came out. Sure. First one is Pictures 11, Robert Plant, album by album.
Yes.
I
got to get that book, and I didn't talk to Martin about that. I didn't have him on to talk about that book.
Yeah, this one's really interesting because I'm actually still relatively new to Robert Plant's solo career compared to Zeppelin. It's only been in the last 6 or 7 years that I've started listening to his solo catalog, because I always thought, well, musically, he's all over the place. I don't think I'm going to like much of this stuff. Turns out I do. Principle of Moments is an amazing album.
Hell yeah.
So good.
And that book is just on that album, Pictures at 11? Is that?
No, no, it's called Pitches at 11, but it's
But
on his
it's
complete career. It's
okay.
from
That's what I thought.
Pitches at
Yeah.
11
Okay.
all the way
Because
through.
that album's good too.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's all the way through Carry Fire.
Okay.
It doesn't talk about either of the Alison Krauss albums. It doesn't talk
Okay.
about the Page Plant stuff. It's just strictly the Robert Plant. So
Gotcha. Phil
um,
Collins on drums on those songs.
on the first two, yeah,
Yeah.
and you can definitely tell.
Big Log, In the
Yeah,
Mood,
Burning Down One
Burn.
Sun.
Oh my God.
Uh,
I'm a big Robert Plant solo fan. I love that. I love the his integrity and his decision to just move forward as an artist,
yeah.
not go back.
Little by Little is one of my favorite
Oh,
tracks of his.
dun, dun,
That's probably the
dun, dun.
first solo song I ever heard from him, to be honest with you.
Wow.
Being my age and listening to radio, I didn't have older brothers or cousins that had, Zeppelin albums. So I'm positive when I say this. The first time I ever heard Robert Plant's voice was "Sea of Love" by the Honey
Oh
Drippers.
yeah.
I know that it was. So
That's a cool EP too. That's got some good stuff.
yeah,
Rockin' at
Rockin' at
Midnight.
Midnight. Yeah. So yeah, Little by Little, I remember when that came out. I always liked that song. But yeah, over the years I've developed quite a taste for Carry Fire and like Lullaby and the Senseless Roar and Mighty Rearranger.
Yeah.
It's all very different stuff. And
Band of Joy, the stuff he did with them.
had the pleasure of seeing him 5 years ago, and that was amazing. It was at a blues festival, and I'm so glad I was able to go. My wife and I went, and it was just like, there he is.
Oh.
Rock royalty,
right
there.
Freaking living legend. And I love doing like he's not like the stretched plastic surgery face. It's like here I am. I'm getting old.
No bones.
I'm an artist. This is it. This is who I am.
He's got absolutely no problem with putting putting his however old face on
man.
the cover. He makes
I just love it.
But it doesn't matter. He's still Robert Plant.
True artist.
So it's I enjoyed taking part in that, but that's a fascinating read. And I got to tell you, I've got a whole new appreciation for Shaken and Stirred as a complete album now.
Yeah.
Because of Ralph Chapman's excellent breakdown of that album in here. So highly recommend that if you're even curious about checking out his solo career, or if you know it well, this will give you another perspective. So,
and I have a question for you, Tim, because I'm sure I have the cassette here somewhere. It's in the attic, but at Strawberries Records back in the 80s, I got it's like an extended version of Little by Little.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't have it, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah, there was an EP.
Right. So I just saw it there, and I loved Little by Little. I remember hearing on the radio, so I was like, "Oh yeah, let me get it."
Yeah,
and it had this really long, extended, kick-ass version, and I didn't realize that that's what it would be. I think it has the original version, but also the extended.
I'm looking at this one on Discogs here now. It's got a picture of him looking sideways, but where his eyes are, there's a blue strip over his eyes.
Oh, is that the one? I think if I see it, I'd know.
Yeah. So it's
what should I look up? Robert Plant.
Just type it. Actually, I typed in Little by Little. It's one of the first things that came up. But it says Little by Little Collector's Edition. Now there may be different versions with different songs on them, but
let's see.
We're going on.
Oh yeah, no, that's the one. That's the one. Yeah.
Now I've got just the regular 7-inch single, and that's just kind of got a variant of the Shaken and Stirred cover on it. But what a fantastic song! Richie Hayward on drums on that one. Yeah.
How about Fate of Nations?
Yeah, Fate of Nations is great. And some
29 pounds.
Some really personal stuff on that album, like I Believe, and
I Believe, and what's the one the first single?
Oh, Calling to
You.
Yeah, good stuff. So it's all in there. It's all discussed and picked apart, and it sent me back to the albums that I didn't listen to as much. So the next one, same idea, and this is actually a band that I'm still getting into as far as I don't have all their albums yet, but I knew 3 of them well enough to take part in this, which I was really happy to do. Honesty Is No Excuse. Thin Lizzy on record.
Okay. Who's the author?
And that's Thin Lizzy is another band. The more I listen to them, the more I like them. So I'm in a lot of great commentary in here.
That's a Martin book, right?
That's another Martin book. Okay. Yeah. And this is where I got the idea to do my panel books. Is is through Martin's album by album books,
Yeah.
because it's just such a great medium of getting perspectives on music that you love, but hearing things in a way that you've never talked about before.
And
So
Martin's a
that's why I
huge
think
Thin Lizzy fan. He loves Thin Lizzy.
absolutely, yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
just like I said, I'm still very much a newbie, but I'm getting everything. I'm getting like I've gotten to really love the Black Rose album and Fighting, and
Yes.
I actually really like the Thunder and Lightning album, and a lot of Thin Lizzy Pierce don't because that's their heavy metal album. But I love John Sykes, so I
That's what I'm
mean,
saying. That's John Sykes on that
yeah,
one. Okay.
that was the last
Gary
one.
Moore is on.
Gary Moore's on Black Rose, some
Okay.
fantastic. Nobody talks about him as a shredder, but he was before he
Hell yeah.
started playing the blues.
My favorite little piece of trivia regarding Thin Lizzy is the fact that Huey Lewis is playing harmonica
I know
on a live album track.
Yeah, on Live and
And you hear him
drives
say,
me crazy. Yeah,
yeah,
right.
yeah. And you hear Phil in it. He's
Bluesy
like,
Huey Lewis.
yeah. He's
Yeah.
like, Huey Lewis. I mean, it's like, that's just crazy because they were opening. That was when it wasn't Huey Lewis in the News.
No, it was Clover.
Clover, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were touring with him. I love it.
And the last one is the same idea. This is a small catalog, but somehow he managed to get a really, really thick, hefty book out of it. Run with the Wolf.
Yeah,
Rainbow on record. So I mean, Rainbow has a really small catalog, but it's but this is a thick book. So there's pretty heavy discussion on it, and it sent me back to listening to all of these albums, particularly the debut, because everybody knows Man on the Silver Mountain, but what else do you know on the first Rainbow album? You listen to it and go, man, I can't believe some of these songs just would make you think, I can't believe Richie left Purple for this.
Yeah.
As great as, the duo of Ronnie and Dio was, it just didn't click until Rising for the most part.
Right.
But anyway, so I was really happy to take part in all three, but they're three really good reads and again, sends me back to the catalogs. So, yeah, Robert Plant
and digs deep
Rainbow.
too. It digs deep.
Yeah.
So, if you're a hardcore fan, or if you, on the other end of it is if you're not, you want to learn more.
Absolutely, and that's the idea. And for me, not to bring it back to me too much, but when people tell me hey, I went on Amazon and I bought a couple of Kansas albums, I bought a couple of Y&T albums after I read your book, or a couple of Sammy Hagar albums.
Yes.
Great. That's what I want. That's an extension of what we do here. It's just to share music we love that we think all people need to do is hear it and get a chance to check it out.
Hell yeah. All right, I'm up. You got three?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
all right. You have heard of the drummer Jim Gordon, correct?
Oh, yes. Very tragic.
Oh, man.
Yeah. I was just, it's funny. Literally, as we're filming this, my wife and I were driving, and Layla came on, and then that switches to that piano section. And I said this, unfortunately, all I could think of is what Jim Gordon ended up doing.
Yes.
So
now this is along the lines of the book on Skip Spence. Tragic story, brilliant musician, did not end well. This one is author Joel Selvin, who did the book with Sammy.
Yep.
Joel Selvin, one of my favorite guests that I've ever had on. This guy, the way he tells a story, he's so into it, and he's just hardcore rock journalist, man. He had the cigar and he's telling the stories. And Drums and Demons, The Tragic Journey of Jim Gordon. That's the book. I cannot recommend this book more. Again, this is a real intense story. This is kind of one that you have to be in the right mindset for. But he takes a different approach on Jim's story. He's kind of pissed off the fact that there's no empathy for Jim, the fact that he was mentally ill and that he needed help, and that the story ends the way it ends because there could have been prevented. I think, it's something that he just needed serious help, and he was self-medicating for too long. He's been called the greatest rock drummer of all time by some, like John Lennon, George Harrison, Eric Clapton, Zappa.
I've seen his name. I was trying to think where I saw his name. He plays on Alice Cooper Goes to Hell. Maybe not the whole album, but yeah, you see his name everywhere.
Yeah,
you go on Discogs and type in Jim Gordon, his appearances are a mile long.
Absolutely amazing, the body of work that he had, and he had such a great technique and a flair to his playing. But he was hearing voices as far back as a child. in the beginning, like Joel describes, in the beginning, the voices were not friendly, but they were more helpful. Like, make sure you fold your clothes, make sure you do, make sure you bring your lunch to school. But then as he gets older, those voices get a little more angry and demonic, to the point where, fast forward to where he's one of the greatest rock drummers around, and he's probably the most sought after drummer. He's hearing voices that are saying he has to kill his mother, and he kills his mother.
Yeah.
And Joel delivers the story of that night, and the fact that after he does what he does, goes down to the bar and he orders a drink. I mean, he was like totally out of his mind. And then he went back home, and then the police found him kind of in a fetal position, like on the ground, and he's admitting, "I just killed my mother. I just killed my mother." I mean, the guy, he was clearly, they never really, I don't think they diagnosed him until really when he was, after the murder. And then he spent really, he was alive for quite a while. I mean, he passed away only, I think, maybe within the last 5 or 6 years.
I just looked, it said 2023.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah.
So not even like a year or two. Right. Right. So, it's just an untold story. It's the complete story. And I think everybody should read it just to kind of take a step back and kind of reassess, because what he did was horrific. Jim Gordon would be the first to tell you that. And so would Joel, but it's just one of those stories. It's a sad story of a guy who was incredibly talented. He had to, at one point, right before that murder, he was playing in like a local band, like once a week, just because he just wanted to play. And the guys in that band were just kind of like, Jim Gordon's band? This is like insane, he just, tragic story. So that's one. What else do I got here? Let's find a couple more. Oh, this was one on Prince. Prince's Purple Rain turned 40. So this is another Motorbooks beauty. Prince and Purple Rain, 40 years. And I had the author on to talk about this one. This one back in May, I had Andrea Swenson on. She's based out of Minneapolis, and she actually knew Prince. Highly recommend this book. This is one of the greatest albums of all time. Would you not agree? Purple Rain. Are you a fan of Prince?
Obviously I grew up in the 80s, and, Prince music was everywhere. And I don't actually own any of his albums, but he's a fantastic musician and songwriter, and a really, really interesting guy.
Yeah.
Like a really, really interesting guy. That you talk about people that knew him, and how shy he was. I mean, just you watch that clip of him when he was on American Bandstand talking to Dick Clark, and how awkward that was.
Yep. And she was talking about the vaults. We talk about Eddie's vaults, the 5150 vaults. It was the point where I think after Prince passed, she was saying that when they went in there to see what's in there, it was like there was like video cassettes, reel to reels, cassettes, you name it, of just all of the work that he had done, unreleased work. And it was literally like packed right up to the door, to where like you had to like push the door, like he had to make an effort to push the door closed. It was like that much in there. And because he was just prolific, he was just constantly creating, constantly writing music, and he always had some new project in mind. And so that's one definite must read. It again. Motorbooks, man, they just do an amazing job with that. I got one more, right, to put in in this round. Okay, I want to go with let's see what else. Well, you mentioned, you know what? I'm going to go. I like the underdog stories. So there's one about an artist named Mia Zapata, the Gits. Ring a bell at all?
Vaguely.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Steve Moriarty was the drummer of the Gits, and he decided he wanted to write a book, which came out in 2024, called Mia Zapata and the Gits, A Story of Art, Rock, and Revolution. This is a band who was from Ohio. They moved to Seattle right around the time the Seattle music scene was blowing up. And they didn't move there because of that. They just moved there. They just figured, he literally said they were just kind of like, yeah, let's go to Seattle. So all these bands are getting signed. They're not getting signed, but they're getting bigger and bigger, better and better. They are like a few days away from signing with, what was the record label, a major record deal, when the singer Mia Zapata gets murdered, coming out of a bar, raped and murdered. And this book focuses on, because it became one of those true crime type stories, and the media was really more interested in who did it, because they didn't find out until I think 10 years ago who did it. And so that everybody was just focused on that and not the amazing talent of her and this band. And again, they were right on the verge. I want to say it may have been Atlantic Records. I'm going to look it up here. But Steve was a great guy, just telling the story about playing gigs, playing on the same bill as Nirvana. I mean, they played at a gig where it was at a university, and one of the classrooms was basically the backstage, and they were just hanging out with Kurt Cobain, and Kurt was saying to the guys, "Man, you guys are good. You guys are good, man." And
you're right. Yeah, I'm just looking at it. Was Atlantic.
It was Atlantic, right?
Yeah.
They met with the A&R guy, and it was like they were ready, like 2 days away from hitting the road, heading to New York, signing the deal, and she got murdered. Tragic story. And then they had a tribute show. Nirvana was there, Mudhoney, Joan Jett. Yeah, that's a great book. Was that okay? Was that what? How many we got? Two more.
I think so. Yeah.
Here we go. All right, I got two of yours, Tim. I'm putting in your book on Kansas. We're putting that in there. I
didn't know he was doing this, folks. Just so you know,
he did not pay me.
I sure appreciate it.
You talk about a band that really a well-deserved book on Kansas. This is the one, and yeah, you were on for this one, Tim. To talk this, everybody knows the hits, so these types of books really get into the whole history. And what it does is, we were just talking about, like, I started listening to everything that Kansas put out from the first album right up until the most recent. And because of, here's the one upside to Spotify, you can listen to all of it, and you don't have to, because back in the day, I was like, I wish I could get that album. I can't afford it.
So yeah, can't afford it or can't find it.
Can't find it.
Don't know anybody that owns it. Yeah, you were at the mercy of, and if you were like me and you didn't live in a major area where there were used record stores, your options were really limited. So you're right. I mean, there are advantages, and you can just go on YouTube and type in, but what this does, I think, is focuses people to say, okay, well, here's what they did. Here are the songs on them. And hopefully you get an idea from each chapter on each album, what kind of album you're in for.
Yeah, you got over 30 hardcore Kansas super fans. Let It Be Your Guide, the Kansas album review. Excuse me, one of the best of 2024. So there you go, Tim. And Tim, folks, Tim had no idea I was going to be mentioning that.
No, I said, when I messaged Eric about doing this, I said, for the love of God, don't feel like you got to mention mine. This is not the point, but I certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. And those early Kansas albums was like, oh, damn, this is good shit. It's like, because as a radio DJ, all I played was the same 4 songs all the time.
They're still, overlooked. To me, as far as prog, they should have been as big as Yes. They should have been as big as Rush. They were right there. I think what happened is they needed 2 more Carry-Ons or Dust in the Winds. They needed 2 more radio staples to keep them going. Fortunately, the catalog's there to explore. And like I've said many times, their recent albums are as good as anything they've done. I hope they do more new music. I would love nothing more than have to add a chapter. That was a real labor of love. And I got to say that book continues to sell. So yeah, it's, I'm very proud of that one.
All right. So now I want to find, I want to make sure this book came out in 2024. That's what I want to make sure. Hold on a sec. Let's see here.
That's not the end of the world if
if it's not, yeah.
But
Yeah. I'm assuming not a Springsteen fan, or are you? Oh, you were saying last time you're not.
A ton of respect for the guy. I'm just
Yeah.
not. I like a few of his songs, but I'm just not on board with the whole
Yeah.
thing.
All right. Well, I just want to. There were a couple Bruce books that came out, and this one here. Let's see, because there was a book by Warren Zanes, who's an amazing author. He broke down just the album Nebraska. It's called Deliver Me from Nowhere, The Making of Bruce Springsteen's Nebraska. What a story. Bruce wrote this on a 4-track. Yeah, it came out in
Yeah, it was never
2023.
meant to be released, right?
It was never meant to be released. It was just demos that he was going to present to the band to turn into hard rockers, which some of those songs ultimately became Born in the USA songs. Even Born in the USA, the song was one that was on that 4-track. And it was just at this house that he found in Jersey. He rented. But that came out in 2023. But I would say if you're a Bruce fan, that's a must. But another one that definitely came out in 2024, another Bruce book. This was album by album, Bruce Springsteen, the music of Bruce Springsteen, album by album, song by song, by Kenneth Womack and Kenneth Campbell. Meticulous research, like every single album, every song broken down, reviews of the albums from the time the album came out, chronological, outstanding. I'm a huge Bruce fan, so I got to give props to that book. Okay. Hopefully you're keeping score here, Tim, because I'm not good with math. I got one more, or what did that hit the three?
Either we're there, or you've got one more. That
Uh,
might have been it. Because my math isn't good either, but I figured it out. I was like, why have I only got three left? But one of them was the Rat book, which I dug out when you were talking.
yeah. Okay.
So,
Well, let me throw another one, because where would classic rock be without the blues? Right. I mean, it's
right.
based in the blues.
Yep.
So I got to talk about a book that came out in 2024 called The Ultimate Book of Blues Guitar Legends, the players and guitars that shaped the music. Over 150 of the genre's greatest players and performers from the pre-war era right up until the present. And I had the author Pete Brown on to talk about that book. This goes all the way back to like Robert Johnson's Son House. This is the interesting thing. Robert Johnson is known as like the originator of the blues, but Son House was the guy who really came before Robert and taught Robert a lot of stuff. But it also gets right up until like the new guys like Gary Clark Jr. and Derek Trucks, Joe Bonamassa, and all those guys. And I'm a big blues fan, and my all-time favorite blues artist would be John Lee Hooker. So that one we got to give props to. So there we go. We're winding down, right?
Yeah. So I'll just give my last pile here. I didn't plan it this way. I ended up with a lot of Martin Popoff books this year.
Well, yeah,
But that's not even all of them. Like he's done a ton more.
We could fill up an entire episode with his book. So I bet you got one of the ones I was going to mention.
Like you talked about with the Rush at 50, it's like I've got a ton of Rush books. I've been a fan of the band forever. What more, what have I not read about this band? And then Getty put his book out a couple of years ago. And, and Kiss is the same type of thing. How many more Kiss books does a man need? Well, I couldn't resist getting this one, Kiss at 50.
Oh, yes.
This is a great book. And again, using those song titles, like when he's talking about the solo albums, he calls it Got to Choose. There's a lot of good stuff, and especially the longer, the longer into the career that it goes. But I mean, he talks about the Kiss Cruise, he talks about Family Jewels, it's really the Hall of Fame. It's really up to date.
Another motor books.
Yeah, for sure.
Book, yeah.
And so there's that one. This was a great read. Now, I did learn a lot about this stuff, and this was a band I knew a lot about. Nick DeRiso from Ultimate Classic Rock.
Oh,
Journey,
yeah.
Worlds Apart. This is a substantial read, and I learned a lot about different phases of their career that I didn't know about it. Nick talked to most of the members, past and present. the unfortunate thing about Journey is that there's been so much bad press with them and so much infighting. Neil Sean and Jonathan Cain and lawsuits and all this. They were one of my favorite bands for many years. It's kind of dampened my appreciation for listening to the music because it's just a bunch of old men fighting over money that they've got more money than they'll ever need. So why are you fighting? But having said all of that, this is a great read, and there's a lot of inside stuff here that I did not know. This also has a lot of cool. There's one device that Nick used that I really really liked. What it does is that it charts each of the albums as they rose and fall off the Billboard charts, among other things, and it also talks about where the singles come in that were released. Fascinating, and Nick was. I also got Nick to contribute to my Kansas book, so he's in one of the chapters there. So really great read. Again, this is one, maybe you've got Journey's greatest hits, but you enjoy a good music read. I highly recommend this, Journey Worlds Apart.
I have not read that yet, and I want to. Just to throw another Journey book into the mix here that came out in 2024. David Hamilton Golland put out a book, Living Just to Find Emotion, Journey and the Story of American Rock. That was another good book.
Yeah.
Yeah. He said on the interview episode that I had David on for, basically at this point, Neil Sean and Steve Perry talk through their lawyers. That's it. They don't talk to each other.
Yeah. It's a fractured, yeah. Enough said.
Yeah.
And this one's on the bottom, but it's actually kind of fitting. It is literally a heavy book. Like, this book weighs a lot, but is it ever good? This book was put out by Brian Heaton with Brian Nairn. This is Roads to Madness, the touring history of Queensryche from 1981 to 1997.
I remember that one. Yeah.
Look at that. And I had Brian Heaton on and talked to him. This is as in-depth a book as you could ever hope to find. I mean, this has stage banter. This has, quotes from people that were at the shows. It's got reprints of ticket stubs. Like, this little band from Seattle, became a platinum selling band. It certainly wasn't likely. But this goes all the way to them forming in Bellevue, Washington in 81, all the way up to the Here and the Now Frontier Tour in 1997. After that, things, of course, got really complicated, but this is a fantastic read. I also want to mention Forward is by Jeff Wagner of Radical Research. And Jeff's the author of, among other things, an excellent book on the band Fate's Warning, Destination Onward. That came out a couple of years ago, so that didn't make my list this year. Jeff and his family had a tragic house fire late. So if you follow Jeff, there's, if you want to help out, there's a way you can do that. But anyway, Roads to Madness. If you got to be a big Queensryche fan to. It's an expensive book, I will say this, but I can see why. It's full color and it's huge. It's, how many pages are in this thing? 579 pages. So, but if you're a big Queensryche fan and you love this sort of minutia, totally worth it. So highly recommended.
Right.
Definitely one of my favorites of the year. And you could bench press this thing, man, and get your, get
a workout.
Yeah, get a workout. So there you go. I mean, and like we said, there are so many more great books, and I love the fact that it's, it's kind of opened up where you don't need necessarily to have a big publisher behind you. There are ways you can get, if you've got an idea for a book, go for it. Like I said,
Absolutely.
I never ever thought I'd be putting books out. Now I'm on my fourth. I'm working on my fifth and sixth, and it's it's gratifying. And when you're not going to get rich doing it. Well, I'm not, but yeah, it's fun when you can find a really in-depth book on a musician you've looked up to for years, but nobody talks about. That's why I do mine. There were no books on Y&T. There didn't appear to be much for Kansas books. There was no books that talked about 8-tracks the way that I talked about them. And there were no books that talked about Sammy Hagar as a solo artist.
Yeah, I'm not done with it. I got a few more on my list, and this is, I was going to save like the best for the last here, too.
Oh, thanks, man. Thank you.
So why there's never been a book on Sammy's career yet.
It doesn't make any sense, right?
Or it was the case until you changed that.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Get this
Yeah.
one red on black.
You're not going to make everybody happy, but like I said, anybody out there that's got an idea, go for it. Just
Yep.
go for it. Yeah.
We didn't mention Martin's book on Iron Maiden too. Album by album.
Yeah, he did an album by album on Maiden. He did a 2-part book on Genesis.
Yeah, he did.
He did another Blue Oyster Cult, another one of those flaming telepaths.
He also
books.
did. What's the other one he did? Got it here. I had him on for it. I do have one other book, by the way, I want to mention.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, what was the other one he did? It was Maiden and come on now. We gotta Judas Priest, album by album,
Right.
he did.
Yes. Yeah. And I know, and I think what you'll find in those books, there are a lot of people. I mean, there are some well-known musicians, but there you'll also find a few names that you recognize from some of my books too. So,
Yep.
which is really cool. I mean, it's an honor to be asked, because Martin could ask anybody. So,
Yep.
yeah. But anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, I've been fortunate to just have some amazing authors on, like yourself. Jeff Apter is another great author I've had on. He had a book on Carl Perkins. He just put out The King of Rockabilly. Who else? Peter Ames Carlin that was the REM book. The name of this band is REM, a biography. But this is one more too. You talk about self-publishing,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
These are the guys from the Shout It Out Loud cast. Tom and Zeus, also Joey Casada, breaks down every single Kiss album and song. It's very similar to what you do with your books, Tim. It's the fans, the people that were part of it.
Yeah, that one's been on my list, and there's another Kiss book that's out. That's the name of it is escaping me. I've been in contact with the author.
Well, you look that up. This is called Raise Your Glasses, a celebration of 50 years of Kiss songs by celebrities, musicians, and fans. Right there. Yeah.
His name is
Rick. I'm leaving more out too. So many great things.
On Instagram, he's called It's All For You, Demon, and he's put out a book. Hold on a second. I do want to give this a shout out, because again, when there's a band like Kiss that's had so many books written about them, it's got to be something really cool when, let's go. Okay. It's called Rock and Roll All Night and Journal Every Day, a year-long guide celebrating the fun of being a Kiss fan by Rick Howard. Okay. I've talked to Rick, and I think he's sending me a copy of this. So yeah, that'll be one I've got coming up. But yeah, if you're interested in a band, see if there's any books. And if you don't see a book or if you don't see the right kind of book, write it. If that's something I've always done, is I've looked around, and in all the cases of the books I've done, if I saw another book that was about the topic I was interested in, I would have just bought it. But I didn't see any other books about 8-tracks that were made in the 80s by the record clubs. I didn't see any books at all about Y&T. I didn't see any books that went in depth on Kansas and Sammy Hagar. So if I seriously, guys, if I can do it, anybody can. So, it can be done. And if you've got an idea and you've got a dream and you've been writing, and I guess don't be afraid to reach out, email people, message people. You might not hear back from everybody. You might not get a yes from everybody, but you never know until you try. Some musicians are more than happy to talk about their career or talk about something they did 40 years ago. Some not so much. So I don't know where
I'll tell you. Well, just to pick up on that, you can hand it off to me on that one, and I'll finish. That thought is a perfect example. I just had an author, Chris Coker, first book he's ever written, all about being a Kinks fan and the stories about seeing the Kinks, about members of the Kinks showing up at their house back in the late 60s for tea, literally. Yeah. These are the stories that are in this book. Chris Coker, the book is called Thank You for the Days. Fans of the Kinks share 60 years of stories. That episode, I'm going to get back to editing right now after we're done here. And there's an example of Sonic Bond decided they were going to take a chance on this. They told them, I've never published a book like this before, but let's give it a shot. There you go. Sonic
Yep.
Bond is another great. They've been great to the Booked on Rock podcast, and they have so many great books there. And they will even say in their books or on their website, if you have a book idea and you want to submit it to them, submit it to them.
There you go.
So it certainly can happen if you have a passion for a particular subject, band. It doesn't even have to be about a band. It could be about the music business itself. A couple of great
Yep.
books that I had. One was The Endless Refrain: Memory, Nostalgia, and the Threat to New Music by David Rowell, who talks about the current state of music and where we're at with streaming services and how music we connect with the most when we're at a certain age between like 13 and
Yeah.
19.
Absolutely. That's true.
You know,
Yes.
books like that are always welcome. There's another one on publishing, the music guide, plain and simple music guide to music and publishing, which Randall Wixon, who's a longtime guy in the industry, wrote a book on. Fascinating. So just have a passion for it, and trust me, people will find the book.
Yes.
And if not, come on my podcast, and we'll let them know. Damn it.
Yeah. And folks, don't forget, if you're not already following Booked on Rock, do it. Bookedonrock.com. You can find Eric on YouTube, and he's been, yes, uh, he wants to promote your book. If you've got a book, Eric's great at promoting it. So, uh, yeah, I mean, that's just a handful of what's come out last year. And there's a lot more. In the comments, I want you folks to list some books that you've picked up in the last year, some music books that you think are really great and recommend, and how to get them. Eric, thanks for coming on, and thanks for all of your support. Absolutely, it is appreciated. And maybe in a year we'll do this again.
My
Um,
pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. Thanks for
it's,
having me
al-
back.
it's always good to chat with you. And yeah, we'll see you all later on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Thank you so much for watching.